Scripture reading today is from the Gospel according to Luke. Please stand if you're able for the reading. Chapter 21, verse 5 through 19. It's titled, The Destruction of the Temple Foretold. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that it is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and 'the time is near.' Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. For these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues. And there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." This is the word of life for the world. Thanks be to God.
We have a wonderful guest preacher. She was here before, but I asked her to come back. So let's receive the message.
Good morning.
Good morning.
New toys. So it's interesting hearing the scripture when someone else is reading it, when you've been reading it yourself for so long. There's a lot in this one, and not much of it's particularly pleasant. So I'm here today to talk to you about my car. In 2014, I needed to replace my old car, and I ended up buying a new car. Now, I live in Sacramento, and like here in Brentwood, we get a good bit of fog. I didn't want a black car or a white car. I didn't want a gray car or a silver car. I didn't want a fog-colored car. So I got this. My fifth graders decided to call it Shiny Red Car. Now, I'm not much of a bling person, but I did get a kick out of that. I got my custom license plate. You are loved. I have kindergartners now. They can all do the little heart. They can't spell their names, but we're working on it. Now, my travel chicken, he loved the car too. I could tie him into the passenger seat. He could see everywhere we were going. Okay. We went everywhere, up and down California, lots of trips to Oregon, even all the way to Georgia. I really came to enjoy this car. Not that pencil. In August, I was down in Claremont, California, to start my second year of seminary. Our program has an intensive week where we're down there for a week for 8 hours a day, and then the remainder of the semester continues online. I was back down reconnecting with good friends, fellow seminarians, enjoying deep discussions, inspired by the subject matter and the setting. We finished our coursework at 5 o'clock on Friday of Labor Day weekend. And after an intensive 8-hour day of classwork, I was ready to hop in Shiny Red Car and drive home. My Georgia and Oregon cousins were both in Sacramento, and I couldn't wait to see them. Now, Did I mention this was 5 o'clock Friday of Labor Day weekend? And I needed to get on the freeway in Southern California. It's an easy drive, really. You hang a left on I-210, you hang a right on I-5, and you drive to Sacramento. But at this point, the freeway was pretty much a parking lot. It took over an hour and a half to drive the 40-ish miles to Santa Clarita, the first easy stop on I-5. And by then I needed to stop, you understand. So I got off at the exit with all the fast food restaurants, and while trying to make a left turn into the In-N-Out Burger parking lot, well, this guy showed up. You might recognize Mayhem. Yeah. If you're not familiar with Mayhem, this is the character in the Allstate insurance ads. He shows up when you least expect it, and your otherwise normal day gets turned upside down. Shiny red car, well, yeah. If you've not been in a major accident, and this was major, I blew every airbag in that car. The thing that you see in the movies where time slows down, it's real. I did not see the other car hit me, and full disclosure, this was my fault. And ironically, as you can see, it is a fog-colored car that hit me. But as my car spun, I remembered my first thought, no, this isn't an accident, it can't be. Followed by, no, this is clearly an accident. This is all happening as I spun. And then the third distinct thought, is this it? Is this the end? It wasn't. And despite the involvement of Mayhem, I'm still here, but shiny red car is no more. When I first read today's scripture passage, the introductory part about how the temple beautifully adorned was to be destroyed, I thought about shiny red car and the loss of things that maybe aren't as critical to our lives as we think they are. I now drive a plain white four-door sedan. I lose it in parking lots. It's that plain. But you know, it's fine. I'm blessed, really, that my friends needed to sell their car right at the time I needed to buy one. But it was a rough adjustment. And although I was physically suffering from the accident, diagonal seatbelt bruises, just imagine, I think I worried more about the loss of the car than the physical impact of that accident's impact on my body. When the implications of replacing this car became more important than the medical issues and taking care of my health, I realized that maybe I'd made shiny red car something like that temple. Driving my plain white four-door sedan, which, by the way, has been nicknamed Incognito, felt like the end of something important in my life, a glorified era, something I didn't want to see torn down. Maybe I'd let Mayhem change my perspective of what was truly important by thinking about the end of my time driving shiny red car. But you know what? Life has indeed continued, and I'm now learning how to find my car in parking lots. Today's passage appears to be concerned with time, particularly the end times, and the mayhem that may precede it. It speaks of wars and insurrections. It speaks of famines and plagues and earthquakes, oh my. Then it gets personal. It speaks of the persecution that will come if we follow Jesus. Rejections by family, arrests and imprisonments, betrayals, and even death. The Gospel of Luke was written about 20 years after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the year 70. The warnings outlined in this passage reflect the actual turmoil of the times. A rapid succession of 4 Roman emperors in the year 69, a famine in the time of Claudius around the year 47, and an earthquake in Philippi around the year 50. Dreadful portents and great signs from heaven may refer to a comet that was noted in the sky while the Jerusalem temple was burning. The persecutions and betrayals describe much of what the apostles were subject to as further detailed in the book of Acts, which was also written by the author of the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke. Scholars think that this passage describes more the events leading to the destruction of the temple than an actual prediction of end times. So, what do we take from this story in today's context? I'd like to focus not on the listed warnings of end times. Passages like this are generally not intended to be taken literally, but they're a genre of writing, like science fiction or romance or poetry. And like today, there's an attraction to being predictably scared. Think horror movies, Halloween haunted houses, or high-speed roller coasters. And I have to get at least one kid's story in here. Years ago, I taught second grade, and my kids loved this book of scary stories. And one story in particular was called The Green Ribbon. And in short, there was a girl who always had a green ribbon around her neck. And at the end of the story, the green ribbon came off, and so did her head. Second graders, they would read this over and over and over. They would squeal every time her head fell off. It was a predictable, safe sense of fear. So this apocalyptic story in today's gospel reading is really just using a popular genre of the time to convey a message. And the message is introduced in part in the middle of verse 9. Do not be terrified. It is clarified and completed in the last two verses, in which Jesus assures us, not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls. The gospel does not offer a way of predicting the end of the world, nor does it promise that a Jesus-focused life will be easy. But it offers us the spiritual resources to get us through the hardships and adversity that will come to us. It shows us that even in suffering, we will have what we need. We will not be abandoned. Now, there's a curious verse in the middle of this passage. In verse 13, Jesus tells his listeners that when they have been persecuted and imprisoned, they will have the opportunity to testify. He goes on to tell them they do not need to have practiced testimony, a rehearsed speech, but that they will receive the words and the wisdom in the moment as they need them. Now, for any preacher who's worked through rehearsing a sermon, this might sound unrealistic, as it did to me when I read it. But I think this speaks more to the testimony of someone suffering. What kind of testimony does a faithful person give in the face of suffering or loss or death? We often think of testimony as praising God for good things, healing, redemption, rescue, salvation. Sean Copeland writes in an article entitled Wading Through Many Sorrows, suffering always means pain, disruption, separation, and incompleteness. It can render us powerless and mute, push us to the borders of hopelessness and despair. Another writer, Nancy Lynn Westfield, responds by noting that in suffering some find, quote, the audacity to muster courage in the face of fear, the boldness to speak in the face of suffering. She continues to note that in suffering, we can find an avenue to share hope. To frame that another way, we could see Jesus as telling us that even in the presence of mayhem, our faith can remind us that we are in good hands. Now, I meet with a spiritual advisor about twice a month. She's a retired pastor, and she's been an amazing guide on my journey into service and ministry. Each time we meet, with whatever we discuss, she always asks, where do you see God in this? Now, that question came up when I was telling her about my car accident. Where do you see God in this? And all I could come up with is, where do I not see God in this? Now, first of all, there were the witnesses. I don't say bystanders, because many did not just stand by. They came down out of the In-N-Out parking lot to help, checked on the other driver and I, got us both out of our cars and to the roadside. The woman who hit me was fortunately local. She wasn't a tourist like myself. Her husband and son were able to come and get her. But I was 6 hours from home, and my car was totaled. One of the saints, and I believe it's hard to see, but the woman in the black t-shirt there, approached me. She said she'd heard me say I was from Sacramento, and that they wouldn't be leaving until morning, but if I needed a ride, her family was going to Sacramento and could get me home. Next, there were the In-N-Out employees. Yeah, I stole that picture. They didn't close. Okay. They came out with water, bags of ice, and those wet floor cones. They put those out in the street to keep us safe until the fire department arrived. Then the official first responders arrived. Fire department, CHP, and then the ambulance. Both the other driver and I were in shock. And they not only tended to our medical needs, but they took care of the details neither one of us would have been aware were necessary. I even got the ambulance guys to break protocol and put my computer bag and box of textbooks in the ambulance with me because I had homework to do. Then there was this guy. This is my Uncle Paul, Mom's brother. 77 years young yesterday. Happy birthday, Uncle Paul. His Georgia daughter and Oregon son were in town, and he'd been up all day. Yet as soon as he heard, he hopped into his car and drove down to get me. And then there was the tow truck driver, who I'd not met as I was in the emergency room when he hooked up my car. He broke with company protocol and let Paul and I into the wrecking yard at 2:30 in the morning to retrieve all of my stuff, knowing that otherwise I'd have to find a way to come back down from Sacramento to clean out my car. And again, Uncle Paul, who would not take the time, get a hotel room, pointed his car north and drove us the 6 hours back to Sacramento. Where was God in all of this? Holding me. Despite the mayhem, I was in good hands. When my spiritual advisor asked me how I saw God in all of this, I hadn't rehearsed anything to tell her. The testimony just flowed. I was still sporting some serious bruises and a good bit of discomfort, but the unrehearsed praise for all the helpers, those words came unexpected, unrehearsed, outshining any whining about the hardships of this accident. So I'd like to wrap this up with a story about my mother. Mom was very Catholic, and throughout her life, she was betrayed, particularly by family, for her beliefs. Her parents were divorced when she was 3 or 4. Her father's side won custody. Her mother was Catholic. And her father's family, who didn't participate in any formal religion, hated Catholics. My grandmother was vilified. Yet my mom felt very drawn to the Catholic Church. And when she was 18 and moved out of the house, the very first thing she did was go and join the church. She married into another non-religious family who also happened to hate Catholics. And it wasn't until years after her death that I realized the mistreatment she received at the hands of her in-laws because of her faith. And throughout their upbringing, 3 of her 4 children directly rejected not only a personal faith life, but particularly the faith life of their mother. And I hate to say I was one of those 3. Now, while I don't think she was ever personally hated for being a follower of Jesus, she was the kind of person everyone loved. She certainly faced a difficult road and challenges to the very core of her being. Despite this, she remained dedicated to her church and strong in her faith. My mother died of emphysema in 1997 when I was 31. Not only had she been through a lot herself medically, she had also seen her father and her aunt who raised her succumb to this disease. We knew the signs that the end was coming. About a week before she died, we were talking, and she addressed to me her faith, not a conversation we had had in my adulthood. She said, I've always believed there's a there when you die. And I guess I'm about to find out. Mom died less than a week later. It's been over 20 years now, and I can still see the look on her face when she said this. She knew she was in good hands. It was the look of peace, lacking any fear, an image of the assurance that comes when you are radically open in faith, hope, and love to the unimaginable and nameless absolute future promised in God. Friends, my hope for all of us is that we can face the mayhem that shows up in our lives, that we can step back and see where God is in each moment, and that we can be willing and open to the Spirit speaking through us, and that we can trust in the promise of a life eternal through steadfast faith in Jesus Christ.